Welcome to another edition of Up Close and Personal. And today we have a special treat. We have an author with us who is from Bristol, Connecticut. His name is James Cleveland. Many of you know him as Jim Cleveland, who was the owner of Bristol Construction.
Right.
And we're going to hear his story about Bristol Construction, but also the story of his life. And the name of the book is Stories of a Lifetime. I had the pleasure of reading it, and now we're going to have the pleasure of talking to you a little bit. Jim, welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Stories of a Lifetime. Tell me, what was it about this time in your life that you said, I think I'd like to write a book?
Well, I had a friend, Randall Gifford, Gifford's Ice Cream in Maine. Anyway, we were talking one day, and he was telling a story about his life. He said, I should write a book. And we talked about it off and on. And then finally one day he says, you know what, you ought to write a book. He said, you got more stories than I have.
You do. Anyone in our audience here who knows Jim, and those who don't know Jim, know that you could sit and talk. Someone could sit and talk to you, Jim, for an hour and just hear story after story.
Right.
And you have had the joy of working with many wonderful people throughout your lifetime, as well as having many wonderful friends, and that's because you're such a wonderful guy and very giving and open, and so that has come back to you through your life.
Thank you.
This book goes through your childhood, your service to our country, World War II veteran. Thank you so much for your service. And how you got started with Bristol Construction. And of course, Jim, you have a wonderful family, lifelong partner with Edna.
Yep.
How many years?
75.
75 years married. And what is the secret to that success?
Listen to your wife.
Always listen to you. And 3 wonderful children, Harry, Tommy, and Nancy, and wonderful grandchildren. But today is about you. And so we're going to talk about the book and the many people and friends and some of the stories, because obviously we want people to read the book. It's a great book that takes you back to an earlier time in your life and teaches us some stories about our own lives, and teaches us how perseverance really is the key to success. So before we touch on some of the things that you did later in your life, you're a resident of Bristol, born here and stayed
All my
here.
life.
All your life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how many siblings?
I had 3. My sister was the oldest, and then I had 2 brothers. And by the way, my oldest brother, George, was in the Battle of Iwo Jima. And he survived. He got hit with shrapnel, but I'd love to tell you a quick story.
Please do.
My brother never talked about he was in the Marine Corps. He joined right after the Pearl Harbor. And he wound up going to the South Pacific. And that's where he's in the Marshall Islands and all in that area for his tour of duty. And when he came home, he never brought up the war, never brought up Iwo Jima. And so he, like a lot of guys, turned to alcohol. And a good guy, went to work every day, but he had to have his alcohol at night. And at any rate, he lived in Winsted when he was dying of cancer. And I sat down next to the bed and I said, George, you never talked to me about the war. Never talked to me about Iwo Jima. Did you ever think you'd like to go back there? Never. He said it was a hellhole. But he said had a sulfur smell that was nauseating. But anyway, I said, can you tell me what happened? Yeah, and he never talked to anybody about this before. He said, we hit the beach, and we got up, he was in a communications division. He said, we got up about 150 yards up the beach, and his company commander said, Corporal, take 2 men, go back down. Our radio men got hit. We need the radios bad. They're down on the beach. So he picked out 2 guys that he knew, and he ran down, picked up the radios, and just as they turned, the other 2 guys took a direct hit.
Oh.
And he never got over it.
And George was the survivor out of the 3 of them.
He was the survivor. And every time I tell that story, I choke up.
Yeah,
thinking about what he went through.
What he went through and what he had to carry when he came home.
Exactly right.
Because it doesn't end.
Most people don't realize how bad, I mean, they think, people get killed, yes, but they don't realize how bad it is for individuals that are there to see their friends getting killed and wounded.
And then those individuals come home and life goes on.
You're right.
But it's very difficult for them. And so we're very thankful for the fact that there are so many veterans programs now that are easily accessible, where before there weren't. When George came home, he didn't have what is available now to the extent that it is now. So he had to learn to survive that on his own. Now, you were in the Navy.
I was in the Navy.
And did you choose the Navy?
Yes, I was lucky. Norm Olson, a guy from Forestville, and was my best friend at the time. And we went down to New York to join the Coast Guard. And I had just turned 18, and he was about to turn 18. So we went down and went into the Coast Guard station, and when we came out, he said, well, I'm in. He said, how'd you make out? And I said, they wouldn't take me. They said, because I was of draft age, I couldn't join. So a couple of weeks later, I got drafted, and I went down to New Haven, and when I went into the quarters where they were, the draft quarters, they had a guy interview you. So when the guy interviewed me, he said, what branch of service you want to get into? And I said, I'd like to get in the Navy. And he said, any particular reason? I said, well, I have a brother in the Marines and another brother in the Army, and I'd like to make it in one in all 3. He stamped it Navy. So I come out of there, and all the rest of the guys that I went down with, they said, how'd you make out? I said, I got in the Navy. How'd you do that? They all got in the Army. There was no choice. They were going in the Army. So I was very fortunate.
So you went in the Navy, but you went alone. You didn't know any of the guys that were going in.
No.
And just to go back a little bit before you joined the service, you went to school, you worked hard. You were always an entrepreneur. For the folks that read this book, I think you're going to learn early on that Jim was always an entrepreneur. You always had, how am I going to get that done spirit. You would sell corn. Yeah. You tell a funny story about the corn, and you don't want to sell the cow corn to somebody. No. But you always had a way of finding a way to say, okay, let me do this, and then I can get this. And built your legacy that way from a very early age.
And I did have help from my wife. Believe me, when I got married, she was there 100%.
There's some nice pictures in the book that, and I had wished that there were some more pictures in the book, but there are some nice pictures in the book showing you when you were first either dating or first married. But so your childhood was based on friends and getting things done and working hard and learning. And I think that that's a key that I took away from the book, Jim, is that you didn't shy away from learning from other people. So you would let a guy take you under his wing, and there were many who did that early on, but then you paid that forward and you took many under your wing. So let's talk about one of the guys who took you under his wing and kind of taught you before you went into the construction business what it was. There was a farmer who you worked with in Burlington, I believe.
Harry Stone.
There we go.
He lived in Forestville, but he retired from a farm in Burlington at the foot of Johnny Cake Mountain. And when he retired, his oldest son took it over, Albert Stone. And that's when during the draft years, when I turned 16, Albert Stone lost his hired man to the draft, Charlie Provost. And when that happened, Albert couldn't take care. I think he had 23 milking cows at the time, plus horses and other animals, and he couldn't handle it himself. He needed help, and there was nobody around. And Harry Stone asked me, I was going to turn 16. He asked me if I would be willing to go up and help Albert. So I quit school. And the day I was 16, I quit school and I went to work on a farm. And it was quite an experience.
Because it was cold.
It was cold.
It was cold.
That
and the work doesn't stop when the wind blows.
No, that was the toughest winter I think I ever went through in my life.
But then again, construction winters weren't that great either, were they, when you worked the construction business?
Right.
But so we'll get over to that. But you had throughout your life, from what I could see and from knowing you the way I do, is that you never shied away from saying, what can I learn from this person? And then taking that with you and building your life's experience.
You know, I have to tell you one thing. I am one guy that never was there a day that came that I wasn't ready to go to work. No job that we had was something that I didn't want to do. I just was anxious to get to work every day and whatever. And of course, that was in the early years. In later years, I wasn't as active because Harry took it over. But
yes, you always had an excellent work ethic and always thought, okay, one of the first jobs for Bristol Construction had to do with the boulevard.
That's right.
In Bristol. You want to tell us that story?
Yeah. We had all small jobs, and I had no experience in the construction field. When I started in business, there was two guys, Bert Norton and Jack Nibbs, who also were peddling milk for Alton Dairy, as I was. And we had the afternoons, usually early in the morning, and by noon we were through. So we had all afternoon to work. And so we decided to go into business. And unfortunately, Jack was the one with the knowledge, and he knew he could do anything. He could paint paper, he could put in asphalt driveways, he could build out of buildings out of brick or block, pour concrete. He just was a handyman and great guy. But we had made an agreement that whatever time we put in at the construction company, we would only take $2 an hour for our time and let the rest of the money build up to build a business. And unfortunately, after, I don't know, maybe about 4 months, I guess it was, Jack said, well, I gotta get out because I can't live on this. I got 4 kids. And so anyway, he got out, and then it was not too much longer after that Bert had the same feeling. He didn't have time to work at the construction company. He had a farm too up in Wolcott, so it left me to do it myself, and that was the best thing that could have happened. But working at Alton Dairy, I worked on a platform, so all the farmers that brought milk in, I got to know them all on a first name basis, and they were. I hired the two Schultz brothers in the beginning, and this one story I don't know if it's in the book or not, but up on Donovan Court at Cedar Lake, I got a job putting in a septic tank for a guy, and so we went up there in the morning and got started. We dug the hole, Sonny Litsky brought the septic tank up and dropped that in, and then we were going on putting the field in. And it was Walt and Riney Schultz and myself. And all of a sudden, Riney says, hey, he says, you guys know what time it is? No, we didn't know. He says, 2:45. We haven't had lunch yet. Walt says, no sense in having it now. He said, it'll just spoil your supper. We kept on finishing the job, and that was it. But that's the work ethics that they had.
It was.
And,
it was.
In those days.
It was.
Get the job done.
They did, but I think too, as a business owner, they felt part of something bigger.
Yeah.
They felt part of Bristol Construction. They weren't just going into work, doing what they did, and that's it.
No. They built the business. I owe everything to them.
Well, they built it with you, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Bristol Construction. I think that I'd like to go back a minute, and when Jack, who left the business early on, you remained friends with him also through the years.
Oh.
So even though he had to move on and do some other things, as you were building the business, folks like that stuck around, and so that's a tribute really to you, Jim, because you had the ability to do that, as well as guys like Elmo Aiuti. I mean, many people know the Aiuti name. You're a direct competitor, right, to your work, yet you were able to maintain the ability to talk to each other about projects, work things out. And I think that that takes a lot of moxie, so to speak.
Yeah.
We're gonna bring up moxie in a bit, because Jim is 96 years young, and I asked the secret to his success, and you'll read about it in the book too. But you drink a moxie every single day.
Every day.
So I ran out to Stop and Shop to try to buy myself a moxie. I figured at 62 I could still start now, right? And wasn't able to find it, but Jim assures me that it's in the store. And so, but moxie is really as much about the drink as it is about your personality, because to be able to work with those guys and to be able to call them up and say, hey, we got to straighten this out, or we got to work this out, it's not always easy. But you did it, and you maintained that respect for them and them for you. So when you and Edna were starting out with your family, did you build your home?
Yes. I hired Paul Peterson, and he had a guy by the name of Al Stanley who lived in Burlington. They're carpenters. They built a house up on Willis Street on the South Mountain in Bristol, and it was in the wintertime when they were building it, and into the spring, and there again, I cut a lot of wood so they had wood to burn to get the fire, keep some heat going there, and but when we built the house, my wife painted the house completely outside and in. she climbed the ladder up where the second floor, well, it was a Cape Cod house, and I'd set the ladder up for her, and she'd go up and she'd paint. She painted all the way up to the roof, you know.
With little kids. You had little kids at the time,
Yes,
didn't
she
you?
did. Yep.
So Edna was never shy about hard work either.
She was a hard worker.
Hard worker.
Yep.
And she was a good cook.
Excellent cook and baker, and seamstress. She made a lot of clothes for the kids, you know, like pajamas and nightgowns and that.
How did you meet?
How did we meet? I was working on a platform at Elton Dairy, and in the summertime, they had a cottage at Cedar Lake, and she used to come in on a Sunday morning. They'd come down to get heavy cream or something for whatever, and milk. And so anyway, she came in there, and I saw her, and I thought I'd like to take her out. And so I wound up calling her one day, and I asked her if she's interested, and she said, well, not really, you know, and okay. So then a couple more Sundays she came down, and I got a half smile out of her. So I called again, and she said, no, I'm sorry, she, you know, I don't know you. And I said, well, how are you going to get to know me if you won't go out with me? So anyway, a third time it happened again. And I got the same answer. I said, how about going out to the movies and tomorrow night? That was on a Sunday. That would have been on a Monday night. Well, unbeknown to me, she sang in a choir in Hartford. She worked at Etna. And she sang in a choir, and that Monday night was the night that they practiced. So, but anyway, after the third time, when I hung up, I said, honey, don't worry about getting another call from this guy, because it's not going to happen. So, and I was not going to call her. So Ray Olson had a team of horses, draft horses. I used to take around to the fairs. And Riverton Fair was the last fair of the season.
Yeah, still is, I think.
It still is. And the drawing ring up there was small enough so there could only be one pair of horses in the drawing ring at a time. So you had, every time you drew, you have to come in and out the gate. Well, guess what? The girl on the edge next to the gate opening there was no more. It was Edna.
Edna?
And she's giving me a smile. So every time I go in and out, I'm getting this big smile from her. This girl must be nuts. So when I got home that night, I said, well, I'll try once more. So I called her, and I said, would you like to go to the movies tomorrow night? And she says, no, she says, I can't, but she says, how about tonight? I said, tonight? She said, yeah. Well, then I found out that she had a choir rehearsal on Monday night. So we went to the movies, and the movie was Kiss of Death.
Oh, no, Kiss of Death.
With Richard Widmark, where he pushes a woman in a wheelchair down the stairs, you know. Well, anyway, so we laugh about that every time we talk about that night.
Kiss of Death at 75 years later?
75 years, yeah.
Yeah. And what a full life that the two of you have had. And that ends part one of today. We're going to have part two because we have so much more to talk about. So I think that we went from the construction company, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, into deep sea fishing, into buffalo, into things that really are parts of your life that most people haven't had the opportunity to experience, and I'd like to do that.
Yeah.
And so if you'll stay with us, we're going to do part two.
Fine.
Another half an hour with Jim Cleveland, and of course the book is Stories of a Lifetime, and it's a Wonderful read for anyone who grew up in New England or even who didn't, who
Right.
Can recognize the fabric of your life and some of the inspirational thoughts that come out of that we can use in our everyday life. So until we see you next time on Up Close and Personal for Part 2, I'm Joni Wedler for Nutmeg TV.